everyone, it's Hayes, and in today's video, as you can probably already tell by the title, we're going to be doing something a little bit different, and we're basically going to be asking, do the Sentimonsters represent autism in Miraculous Ladybug? And part of the reason we're doing this is because, first of all, I got accused of being ableist towards Kagami because apparently she might be autistic, and they were like, the only reason Hayes dislikes Kagami is because she's autistic, and I was like, no. However, a lot of people don't know I'm autistic, and it's not because I try and hide it or whatever, it's just because the channel's about Miraculous, it's not about me. If the channel, like, I only made videos about myself and like my life and everything that's happened to me, then yeah, probably most people would know I'm autistic, but I only bring it up when it's relevant, and most of the time it's not relevant. But today it is going to be relevant, so that's what we're going to be talking about in this video. And for the purpose of this video, because it is also involving the Sentimonsters, I am going to assume for this video that Adrian, Felix and Kagami are Sentimonsters. However, as always, I haven't read the show Bible and I haven't seen any of the leaks, but worry not, because somebody sent me an email with all of the Google Drive links to them for whenever they think I just can no longer wait and want to know what happens in whatever episode. I can wait until we've seen the whole show legally. So worry not, okay? You don't need to tell me what happens in the show. I have all of the answers in my email inbox if I want to find out, okay? I do not need you to tell me for me. I can go and find the answers myself. Thank you very much. So obviously in this video, because I don't know what happens in the rest of the season, I'm not really sure if I am correct. I feel like out of all the characters in the show, because we were told last season there are 3 Sentimonsters, to me these are the 3, but as I said, because I haven't seen all the other leaks and stuff, which are illegal by the way, so if you are looking at those, I would implore you to stop, because please respect the show, besties, please. So I think it is definitely a possibility that some of the other characters could be Sentimonsters, and that some of the other characters could be autistic, but I'm mainly only going to be focusing on these 3 characters, so Adrian, Felix and Kagami, and I'm going to touch on some of the other characters a little bit later on in the video, but the main focus of this video is going to be those 3, so for the purpose of this I am assuming they are all Sentimonsters, and I feel like for sure Felix and Kagami are confirmed. Well, in my head Kagami definitely, Felix almost definitely, Adrian I'm like 90% of the way there. Like Kagami I'm at 100, Felix 98, Adrian like a 92. So I'm over 90% for all of them. So I'm pretty sure they all are. And speaking of which, I'm going to be like picking up evidence for them being Sentimonsters and autistic in this video from all of the episodes we have seen so far for season 5. So I know a lot of you are waiting until we see episode 11, but I am going to be mentioning evidence for autism and Sentimonsters all the way up until the last episode we saw, which for me were episodes 19 Pretension and episodes 20 Revelation. So by the time this video goes out, maybe we'll have seen more, maybe we'll got trailers for other stuff or air dates and stuff, but as of right now, as of making it, the last episode I saw was episode 20 Revelation. So I will be mentioning things that have happened in episodes, all the ones that I've aired legally so far for season 5, so if you are waiting to watch them, this video isn't going to be super spoilery. I'm not going to be spoiling loads about the plot from them, it's mainly going to be very character focused, but if you're waiting until you've seen episode 11, I would maybe not watch this video. So let's just focus on these 3 characters. So Sentimonster stuff aside, we're not really going to be discussing the Sentimonster evidence in this video. Why do I think they're autistic? And why do I feel like I have the authority to talk on this? As I said, I am autistic, and full transparency, I was diagnosed, it's not really like the term's kind of being phased out now, but I was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, which is like a form of autism, and it's usually referred to as high functioning autism, but that term's just kind of being phased out now. But I just thought, full transparency, that's my official diagnosis, so autism but Asperger's, and I say Asperger's, but I know a lot of people call it Asperger's, which just makes me laugh. I remember once I was having a conversation with one of the head scriptwriters for like one of the UK's most popular shows in the UK. If you don't watch Coronation Street in the UK, you know. So I know one of the scriptwriters on the show. We were having a conversation about autism in the show, and I was like, oh, I think the character Roy, if you know Corrie, you'll know who Roy is. I was like, I think he could have Asperger's, and me and this writer had a great discussion about it, and he but he kept calling it Asperger's, and I was stood there trying to be dead serious. I'm like, It was so funny. Anyway, I don't actually know what the correct pronunciation of it. I believe it's a German last name because it's to do with the Nazis. Hence kind of why part of the reason the term is being phased out, because it's to do with the Nazis. So I don't actually know how to correctly pronounce it, but if the correct pronunciation is Asperger's and not Asperger's, then that's the greatest thing ever. So yes, I am autistic. I obviously have been autistic my whole life because you're born autistic, you don't catch it, you don't get it from a vaccine like a lot of people say. If you're autistic, you'll be born autistic and there is nothing you can do about it, you cannot cure it. So if anyone says like, oh yeah, you can cure autism, no you can't, and you're not welcome watching this video, so please leave if you think you can cure it. And before anyone says, Hayes, you don't look autistic, you don't sound autistic, you don't act autistic, I think the real question is, do I smell autistic? No, I'm kidding. Please stop saying that. It's autistic people mask all the time, and kind of what I'm going to talk about eventually in this video is autistic stereotypes and why a lot of you probably don't think I'm autistic, because I don't fit a lot of the stereotypes. But yeah, and also before anyone says, oh, we're all autistic, we're all somewhere on the spectrum, please don't say that either. That is incredibly offensive. Please don't say it. Just because you may have some traits that other autistic people do does not mean you are autistic, so please don't ever say. My mum, she's an autism expert, and she helped me write this video with some other stuff going on. She gets, because she's autistic too, she gets really annoyed whenever she like goes to give like a conference or a talk at a school about autism to the teachers, and one of them always, guaranteed, will always come up to her and say, we're all on the spectrum though, aren't we? Just a little bit. My mum's like, no. God, so annoying, so please do not say that, bestie. So like I said, I had my mum kind of not make this video with me, but help me with like the prep work for it, and we watched some episodes of Miraculous together, which was awesome since she doesn't watch Miraculous, so it was cool that I finally got to show it her. She didn't like it, who's surprised, not me, but I basically showed her Adrian, Kagami and Felix's behaviour, and she was like, yeah, I would like recommend them all go to their doctors for an autism diagnosis. So she doesn't diagnose people. What my mum's job is she basically she goes into schools and to families with a child who is presenting autistic behaviours, whether or not they have a diagnosis, and she basically gives them strategies to help combat this different type of behaviour, because a lot of autistic people behave quite differently to non-autistic people. So that's what my mum's job is. She doesn't diagnose people, but as you can imagine, she's autistic herself and she works with autistic people every day but the weekends. So she has a massive exposure to the community in the area where we live in England. So my mum does know what she's talking about. So let's look at the behaviours of Kagami, Felix and Adrian, which is basically what my mum helped me with when we were watching the episodes and what she observed. But please don't use this video as a way to diagnose yourself with autism. If you think you're autistic, then I would recommend talking to your parents. I know a lot of you are children, or just going straight to the doctors to discuss getting tested for a diagnosis of it. It is a bit of a long process, I know, but I would do that instead of relying on me. Because whilst I have autism and I'm an expert in my own autism and my difficulties and needs and stuff like that, I am not an autism expert in general. So that's why I use my mum, because I would argue she is an autism expert. So yeah, that's why she helped me with this video. So I would argue all three of them have a strong sense of justice, which is traits that is quite common in autistic people, even if it is skewed often for their own benefits, like with Felix. However, for example, Adrian, he's cat noir, he wants to try and help more people at large, whereas Felix is like, no, this is for me. But as we saw in episodes like Emotion and Pretension, he very strongly believes in what he is doing is the correct and is the right way. And as we've seen with Adrian in other episodes, he also believes saving the city and stuff very strongly. He thinks it's the right way, and Kagami also has a very literal sense of justice, which kind of plays into her, like, she doesn't quite understand all the cultural nuances, which is another trait of autistic people. They often have a literal way of thinking, or it's called like black and white thinking. Kagami does this the most out of anybody in the show. She takes things super duper literally. She just doesn't understand the cultural nuance of certain things. She doesn't know how to read people's faces, their body language, doesn't know how to read the room. Kagami has no idea what's going on. She's definitely gotten better as the show has progressed, but she largely isn't very good with cultural nuances. And Adrian does it very occasionally, for example like in the episode Penalty, where he just picked up the ball. To someone with autism, that would be probably the literal way to play football, just to grab the ball, because that's easier than kicking it, obviously. And just back to Kagami, another trait found in a lot of autistic people is missing social cues, which Kagami does a lot. She misses a lot of social cues, and she just doesn't really understand a lot of the unspoken social rules of most situations, really. For example, her first ever appearance in the show in Riposte, or for example a non-autistic person like Marinette, who I don't think is autistic, she kind of walked into it, she paired up with Adrian because it's someone she know, they practiced together, and they kind of chatted a bit while they did it, whereas Kagami came in fully already in the fencing gear, and she was like, you, teacher, who's the best here, and whoever they are, I'm gonna fight them to the death. Obviously Marinette and Kagami here, who Kagami I think is autistic regardless of whether or not she's a Sentimonster, and Marinette, who I don't think is Senti but I also don't think is autistic. You could see the very different approaches there. I understand Marinette had a different motivation in that scene, and that was to get closer to Adrian, whereas Kagami was doing it because she likes fencing and because her mum told her to. But you can see the differences in their social behaviour in that scene in Riposte. Felix doesn't seem to have that much of an interest in making friends, which is another autistic thing. They just want to do their own thing, forget everyone else. That's normal. And Adrian isn't the best at making friends. Out of the three of them, he's probably the best at it, but he's still not the greatest at it, as we saw in Origins. He had a terrible first day at school, to be honest, where Marinette was concerned, because he just wasn't able to articulate what he was actually doing. So yeah, but they did make up eventually, so Adrian isn't that bad, but he still does have missing the social cues and reading the room. And another thing autistic people do, which kind of makes them vulnerable, which is what I often do, is overshare. I feel like I'm better at it than I used to be, but I can still find myself doing it, especially if it's someone I'm comfortable with, but maybe we just all do that if it's someone you're comfortable with but you don't know super well, but it can make you really vulnerable and put you in a dangerous situation. And I feel like Adrian does this the most, particularly when he's Cat Noir. Being Cat Noir, in my opinion, between being Adrian and being Cat Noir, is Adrian's kind of safe space. He gets to be completely free, which is what he's always wanted. It's why he loves going to school so much, because he gets to be free. And when he's with Ladybug, he just have a tendency to overshare. Even though he's not allowed to tell her like things about him, he is very like open. Like his love language is like expressing to Ladybug exactly how he feels, whereas Marinette's love language towards Adrian is very, very different. So Adrian does have a tendency to overshare, but only in situations where he feels super safe, which I guess is a good thing, but is also at the same time a little bit like, slow down, mate. Alright, calm down. She's still gonna be there. You're gonna see this girl every single day for like a year. You don't need to do this. Another facet of autism they all display is difficulty articulating yourself, or that you have no filter, which Felix and Kagami do the most. They are very, very blunt. They just say what they mean. They often don't consider other people's feelings, and we've seen with Adrian, especially where his father is concerned, he often has difficulty fully articulating himself as well, but in the complete opposite way to Felix and Kagami. Felix and Kagami say exactly what they feel, and they often don't care how the other person will react to it, whereas Adrian, he feels a bit too much and doesn't know how to express himself, basically. And I would say all three of them are arguably kind of like, it's often called like the little professor thing, that's what my mum called it. It's basically like super duper intelligent. All three of them are super intelligent, but Felix and Kagami let it show, whereas Adrian's a lot more withdrawn and casual about it. So being clever is often an autistic thing. And the final facet of autism that me and my mum observed in them is just in general difficulty regarding emotions. Felix doesn't seem to feel much. Obviously we've had like the least screen time for him. He doesn't seem to feel much. The only time he's, in my opinion, had a proper emotional outburst was in the episode Emotion, ironically, where he was obviously crying on the rooftop, but to him that was a really big deal. He'd killed a human being in his mind, basically. He was like viewed himself as a murderer, hence why he got so upset. So he does feel things, but only when it's an extreme situation, like when someone dies. Adrian, like I said before, he feels too much, he gets upset very easily, which I don't think is a bad thing, because I cry like every day. So I got to be on Miraculously Lazy's final podcast on the Miraculous Besties, and I haven't listened it back to it yet, so I'm not sure if this was before or after we started recording. I was up to like 1 AM recording this, so I don't remember much from it. Towards the start, like, Heartskip was asking everyone how they were, and I was like, well, honestly, not great, because I've already cried like every day this week leading up to this, having to say goodbye to Lazy. So like, I probably do feel a bit too much sometimes, and Kagami is a bit of both. Right at the start of the show, or her debut in the show in season 2, and in a lot of season 3, she was a bit more like Felix. She would only get upset if it was like a really dire situation, but as the show has gone on and she's been more exposed to the outside world, as we saw in Protection, she did break down crying. So Kagami's a bit of both, but I do feel like there's a lot of, again, difficulty regulating her emotions. She either comes off super duper blunt or she gets really, really sensitive, and there doesn't ever seem to be like a neutral in between for her. She's at one end of the extreme, hence why it's difficulty regulating the emotions. Now I feel like as I've gone through that list of all these different signs of autism that me and my mum noticed when we were watching some of their scenes from Miraculous, and there definitely could be other signs of autism within the show that I've completely missed, so let me know if I have, but I do feel like a lot of it could be explained by the 3 of them having a sheltered upbringing. As we know, Kagami has been like Adrian, seemed to have spent most of her life inside. Whenever she wasn't inside, she'd be escorted around by her mother's self-driving car, so she doesn't even have a driver to interact with. However, Adrian, whilst he has had a sheltered upbringing, I would argue it's definitely been very different to Kagami's. Kagami was brought up seemingly by someone who was very strict from what we know so far, whereas Adrian, his mum seemed nice. I'm still a bit iffy on Emily, so I'm not 100% sure like how wonderful and great of a mother she was, but Adrian does seem to have some really fond memories of her, of them having fun together, and it does also seem that Gabriel was a lot more fun when Emily was around too. So even though his upbringing was very sheltered in that he was confined seemingly to a single house or a mansion, I'm not trying to say like he was confined to one room, you know what I mean? Like he had a massive mansion to explore the whole time, but it does seem like he got a decent amount of social interaction and had a lot of fun with his parents as he grew up at home. So Emily for sure did seem, from what we know, because I know we don't know a lot, did seem like she was a positive influence on Adrian, hence why he's so kind and lovely, whereas Kagami, it doesn't seem she had like the most fun upbringing. Kagami is a very disciplined person, so I don't really feel like she had a similar sort of thing. Like it was only similar in that it was also sheltered, but it was very strict, whereas Adrian's was sheltered, but there was some fun involved. Obviously not all fun and games, because Adrian can speak Mandarin and he plays the piano and he does fencing, so obviously it wasn't completely fun, but like definitely more fun than Kagami's. And Felix, I'm not 100% sure on, since like I said before, we know the least about him, but Emily seems like a great mum. I love Emily, she's great. His father, from what we know, which isn't much, sounds like a horrible person. So I feel that Felix's upbringing is probably somewhere between Adrian and Kagami's upbringing. So like I said, I feel like a lot of those facets of autism could have just been fostered due to their upbringing, which is totally possible. Again, to me, they have enough similarities in their personalities, but enough differences in their upbringing that I don't think that's entirely the case. Maybe for some of the behaviour they display, but I don't think it can explain all of it as just being one big coincidence. I don't think that's the case. And I also do feel like other characters could possibly feed into a lot of these other signs I've just talked about. For example, Max and for example Julika, I also feel it's a strong possibility they both could be autistic, but we're gonna come back to those later, I promise. We're just gonna focus on Adrian, Felix and Kagami for right now. So I do wholeheartedly believe, as an autistic person and someone who is yeah, I'm not a Sentimonster denier, I'm a Senti theorist. I do believe being Senti does represent autism in the show, which on one hand I do think is a good thing. In my opinion, like ever since I was 18, maybe I have a different view on this because I was diagnosed so much later in life, but prior to the age of 18, I never even noticed how often autistic people were represented in media, and I knew what autism was. My mum's worked in the autism field for ages. One of my younger brothers got diagnosed with autism when he was 11, so I would have been like 13, so I've known what autism is for most of my life. But it just never occurred to me that I never saw a lot of autism representation in media, just in general, and ever since I did get diagnosed with it, I haven't seen a lot since. It's definitely better than when I was 18, I'm 26 now, but it's still not great. And often if an autistic character, like usually in something live action, if there's an autistic character, they are often also played by someone who isn't autistic, which I really don't like because then the portrayal often comes off as extremely offensive, which obviously I don't like. And then the other thing I really don't like, and I think is part of the reason why a lot of you always say they don't look or sound or act autistic, Hayes, is because often the autistic character in whatever film or TV show or whatever is that little professor type of autism, a bit like Felix and Kagami, where they're like the Sheldon Cooper type, where they're really, really clever but really bad at socializing, which is also kind of another reason why I wanted to make this video, because as much as I do believe the Sentimonsters do represent autism in the show, but again, like, I'm making this video without knowing who actually is Senti and without knowing who, if anyone, is actually autistic in the show, as if Thomas Astruc wrote them with the goal of them being autistic, is that as an autistic person, I would really love if Adrian was autistic. So don't get me wrong, that little professor thing is totally real. The Sheldon Cooper type, let's call it, is completely real. However, the people who are like that, who are autistic, are few and far between. So like I said, my mum is like an autism expert where we live in the north of England, which is awesome, don't get me wrong. But because of that, I have met a lot of other autistic people, and when I say a lot of other autistic people, I mean like a couple of new people every week. So I have met a lot of autistic people, and in the whole time my mum has been doing this job, which is since the age of about 14, I've only ever met one person who is the Sheldon Cooper type of autism. No one else, only one. So I've met a lot of autistic people in this area of the country, and only one has fit that stereotype. Now, I don't know the exact numbers for the people who fit that kind of stereotype, but since I've only met one of them, it kind of shows to me that it doesn't happen often. And like with my mum's line of work, she's met a lot more autistic people from me, from all over the country and in other countries, and they don't fit that stereotype either, from what she tells me. Like, she does meet them upon occasion, but it's an occasional thing. It's not an everyday occurrence. So whilst that stereotype is from something that is true, those people do exist, it is not the normal lived experience of someone with autism. And while I am reasonably clever, as most of you know, I'm doing a PhD, I have a novel published, I did 2 masters at the same time as working a job and other stuff, I won't brag about myself, I don't fit like the Sheldon Cooper stereotype, as most of you can probably tell. I'm pretty okay at socializing, as we can tell. Most of you say most of my videos sound like I'm talking to you and having a great conversation with you. So I'm reasonably okay at socializing when the occasion calls for it. Like, don't get me wrong, I still have bad days where I like just physically cannot talk to my mum or my brothers, and I've known them my whole life. But there are other days where at the same time I can go on the Miraculous Besties podcast and talk to 5 other people for 3 hours and have no problem. So I'm reasonably good at it. So I therefore don't really fit the autistic stereotype, which is why most of you say, Hayes, you don't act autistic. So I would argue Felix and Kagami do in some parts fit the autistic stereotype, but the reason why I would like Adrian to be autistic is because whilst he shows all these different signs of autism, he is like me in that he doesn't fit the stereotype. So I would really like it if for a change we got autism representation that wasn't someone who was super duper clever and really bad at socializing. Yes, Adrian is clever, but he doesn't really show it. He only like brings out his intelligence when it's required, and he's also pretty good at socializing. So I've like, honestly, I kind of identify with both Marinette and Adrian in different ways and stuff like that, but I would be absolutely delighted if Adrian did end up being autistic, because I would for the first time get to see an autistic character who would actually be like me, because like I go out of my way to try and find novels and films and TV shows about autistic characters, and even if they are played by people with autism or written by people with autism, I just never feel a connection to them because they're often this Sheldon Cooper type stereotype, and I do not identify really in any way, shape or form with Sheldon Cooper at all. Like, I've seen almost the entirety of The Big Bang Theory and I'm like, okay. I don't relate to him at all, but I do really relate to how Adrian struggles with getting to grips with this seemingly new world to him, and honestly every single time I leave my bedroom it feels like I'm stepping into a brand new world and I have to learn all these different new social rules every single day. So even though I didn't really have a sheltered upbringing, like I wasn't homeschooled or anything like that, I've been to state school here in the UK my whole life, every single day has been like a struggle to like learn all the new social rules. Every day feels like it's a new world. So I would really love if Adrian was a Sentimonster, because in my opinion being a Sentimonster does represent autism in the show, and where Adrian is concerned, who is someone I would argue does not fit the stereotype of autism that I personally often see in media. Although if you've got any recommendations for any media about autism that doesn't follow like the Sheldon Cooper type stereotype, please let me know because I want to see it. And I would really love it if Adrian were to be senti and autistic, because he's like the only autistic person in media who I've ever been able to identify with in terms of my autism. So I do feel like it's entirely plausible that the Sentimonsters do represent autism in the show, given the traits of Adrian, Felix and Kagami, whether or not they fit into an autism stereotype or not. However, whilst I acknowledge all of that was positive, we gotta look at this in a more critical eye, because I feel like it's something quite serious, representing something like autism in media. It can't just be done with like a soft touch. Like, if you're gonna do it, let's do it properly, which is code for now I'm going to complain about it. So while I think in general, on the surface level, this could be a very positive thing, I'm also kind of worried about what kind of message this would send. So I've seen like a lot of discord in my comment section, other people's comment section, and on Twitter, but Twitter is some sort of hellscape anyway. But basically, how about anyone who's a Sentimonster, whether they look and act human or they look quite different, like for example Feast, they aren't fully human. Even if they look and act like it, they will never be fully human. And honestly, like I don't really care either way, to be honest with myself. But either way, a lot of people don't perceive them in the fandom. I know they're obviously not real, but a lot of people don't perceive them to be fully human, which I feel like could send the wrong message about autistic people. And I feel like it could encourage a view that people who are autistic aren't fully human. And maybe a lot of you who aren't autistic, who've got to this point of the video, are like, why would anyone think autistic people aren't fully human, Hayes? What on earth? What? Why would anyone think that? I don't think that, and bestie, I'm really glad you don't think that. However, so as I mentioned before, I'm 26, so I've been through a lot of friends in my life, and also because I'm 26, I also used to go on dates. I don't anymore because of this reason. So when I make a new friend or when I go on a date with someone, I usually tell them fairly fast, not within the first 5 minutes, when I feel like things are going well between us, I'll be like, hey, by the way, I'm autistic, just so I should let you know. Because first of all, it's a big part of my identity, I'm not ashamed of it, but it does explain a lot of my behaviours and why I may act a bit differently for someone who isn't autistic. But I also just feel like if I'm gonna be friends with this person in the long term, or I'm gonna date them and it's gonna lead to something else in the future that's more serious, they should probably know, because it's like I said, it's a big part of who I am, to be honest. And most people are just like, huh, cool. And they're fine with it and they don't think anything of it because it doesn't make me any less of a person to be autistic. However, I have had more people than I expected, and maybe again I have a different view on this because I spent, like so far, I spent the majority of my life, whilst I've been autistic the whole time, I didn't know I was autistic for most of it. Like, I got my diagnosis at 18, 19, I'm 26, so I haven't even known for a decade yet that I've been autistic. So maybe I have a different view on the stigma and stuff because I've spent so long, like, no one could stigmatise me because I didn't know, so why would they do it to me? Because I didn't know either. But often when I go on a date and I tell the guy that I'm autistic, these men have often told me autistic people aren't fully human, that they are subhuman, they're an alien race. This is what people genuinely believe. Obviously I understand not everyone, but some people do it. And at the same time, when I've made friends with people, we're getting on great, and I tell them I'm autistic, and then they just slowly back away from me, and they tell me I'm not fully human, that I'm subhuman. Which is a horrible thing to be told, that just because you're autistic, someone basically thinks you're not even from this planet. Which is just bizarre, and I don't really understand, but turns out it's a fairly common stigma for autistic people that some people don't even view them to be human. So as you can imagine, I'm not the best for making friends due to some of the reactions I've got from telling them I'm autistic, and also the reason why I haven't been on a date in a few years, because I'm just like, you know what, I'm not prepared for a man who probably doesn't even know how to do his own laundry to tell me that I'm not fully human. Like, well, at least I can use a washing machine, alright? So even if I'm not from this planet, I can use a washing machine, you probably can't. So I do know quite a lot of autistic people do watch me, so I don't know what kind of stigmas you've all been through, but that's the most common one that I come up against when I tell people I'm autistic, is that I'm basically not a human, which is what a lovely thing to be told. Just so bizarre, but okay. So I feel that if the Sentimonsters were the only autistic people in the show and no one else was, it would encourage and perpetuate this view that autistic people are basically not fully human. So that's why I did mention Max and Julika, and maybe even Luca could be autistic too, because whilst I definitely think being senti could be like a metaphor as a way to represent autism in the show, I would also very much like it to be represented outside of the Sentimonster theory in characters like Max, Julika and maybe Luca, who I am confident those three are not Sentimonsters. I would like it to be represented outside of Sentimonsters too, just so it's not one-sided, only the Sentis who may or may not be technically fully human or autistic, because of like a stigmatised view that the creators may subconsciously have had. And whilst I understand that Max and Julika definitely do fit the autistic stereotype a bit more, I'd rather have a stereotypical representation of autism rather than one that's been fueled by stigma and would encourage people to think that autistic people aren't fully human. So if these three are all Sentimonsters and are all going to be autistic, then I would like some non-senti autistic characters to basically combat it. Because like, I do think it's cool that Sentimonsters can be born with conditions like autism. Let's not call it a disorder, because it's not a disorder, there's nothing wrong. Like, I have my difficulties, but there's nothing wrong with me. So whilst I think it's cool that Sentimonsters can have something like autism, I would also like to have the non-sentis in the show also have the ability to have autism in this world. And from what we know so far, as I'm making this video anyway, Adrian, Felix and Kagami were all seemingly made with a broken Miraculous. And it does kind of make me think, was the fact that it was broken the reason why they've all ended up with these kind of similar personalities? If the Miraculous had been fixed when they'd been made, it hadn't been broken, would they not have been autistic? So again, I feel like because they were made with a broken Miraculous, is that the reason they're autistic? It could kind of perpetuate this idea that there is something wrong, that there's something broken about people who are autistic. Like I said, I have difficulties, don't get me wrong, but there isn't anything wrong with me. I just need extra help. That doesn't mean there's something wrong. Like, we all need help at different times for different things, for whatever reason, disability or otherwise. That doesn't mean there's something wrong with us. You know what I mean? So again, I feel like it maybe could perpetuate the stigma, hence why I think on one hand I do feel like the Sentimonsters representing autism could be a really cool idea, but also on the other hand I only think it's cool if other characters like Max, who I really think could be autistic, are also autistic whilst outside of being a Sentimonster, so it doesn't perpetuate these stigmas that autistic people aren't fully human or that there's something like broken about them, you know? So that's what I would hope. So while I do think it is really cool being a metaphor for autism, I would also like some representation of autism in the show that isn't fueled by something that isn't even real. Sentimonsters. Like, I do feel like if there are no other autistic characters outside of these three, who for the purpose of this video, like I said, I just assumed were autistic, I would be a little bit insulted by it, to be honest. So that's what I think, besties. Like I said, I'm not 100% certain that these three characters are Sentimonsters, or 100% certain they are autistic, because it hasn't been fully confirmed yet from the information I know. If you already know who is Senti, maybe it's none of these three, please don't tell me. I want to find out when I watch it in the show and whatever episode it's revealed. But all this information in this video was basically based off observations that I made with my mum, and we are both autistic people with a lived experience of autism, and she also does a lot of work in the autism community around where we live. And also, interestingly, so out of the three of them, I bet a lot of you are thinking right now, like, Kagami and Felix definitely autistic, Adrian maybe not so much. Interestingly, out of the three of them, Adrian was the first character my mum picked up as maybe being autistic, not Kagami or Felix. It was Adrian she picked up on first, so maybe that's just my mum, but I'm only telling you what she said, and she does know what she's talking about. so, like, she's pretty good at her job. So, not to brag, but Mama Clark, she's great. So, anyway, besties, I would love to know what you think of my ideas. Do you think the Sentimonsters represent autism in the show? Do you think it's cool? I hope you do. Because often autism isn't represented a lot in media, and I'd be really happy if it was represented in Miraculous, because it's a really popular kids show. And definitely when I was growing up, I know I'm 26 now, the world has changed quite a lot in terms of representation from when I was a child. I don't ever remember seeing a children's show when I was a child that had really any disabled characters in, let alone an autistic character specifically. So I'd be really happy if they were, especially Adrian, because in my opinion he doesn't fit the autism stereotype. So besties, I'd love to know what you think of all of my thoughts, especially if you are autistic. I know a lot of autistic people do watch me when they find out I'm autistic, which is awesome, but I'd love to know what all of you think, whether or not you are autistic, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!